He is not in control of what happens to prices. Mr. Biden wasn't. No president who has ever confronted an inflation has been able in some kind of magical way by issuing an order to stop it. It misunderstands the relationship between economics and politics. One is the driver, that's the economy, and the other one reacts as best they can, usually in a limp way, trying to make some adjustment, and if they're lucky, they can get away with it. So boldly saying he's instructed his associates to do the impossible, it strikes me as charming. It's like instructing them to go and practice so they can leap over the Empire State Building. All the practice in the world not going to help you do that, you silly person. It's a kind of theatrical fakery that passes for heavy concentration. And let me drive something else home. Drill, baby, drill? Really? You know the costs of that? You think that an explosion of drilling is going to stop the inflation? No, it isn't. There's lots of factors that are pushing prices up. Not the least of them is deporting immigrants, imposing tariffs. Tariffs are a tax. They raise the price of what those taxes are applied to. This is a basic law of economics taught in every classroom across America, but apparently beyond the capacity of Mr. Trump and the people applauding. And you really have to use metaphors I will not dare employ to capture what's going on here. If at the same time that we impose tariffs that raise prices and we have a collapse of the poor people in this country's economic circumstances, in other words, they cannot service household debt, which is at a record level in this country, or corporations cannot service their debt, which is also at a record level in the history of the United States here. One of the responses would be something that happened a few years ago in Japan, depression. In other words, the opposite of an inflation, you have a deflation, falling prices. That could happen. And then someone would say, see, when you impose tariffs, prices go down. No. But if you do tariffs at the same time that other major influence on prices occur, well, then it can go any which way. That doesn't deal with the normal. All I'm telling you is that if you have a big program of tariffs, it's now become incumbent on Mr. Trump, if he's going to do that, to tell us how and why we should expect offsetting developments in the world economy that could bring us down. Giving us examples of when it went one way or the other is irrelevant. He has to do that, and he hasn't done that. There's absolutely nothing that we should expect in this kind of situation. At the instigation of the United States, we have a treaty called NAFTA. Under Mr. Trump's first presidency, that treaty was renegotiated, signed again by Mr. Trump, which expressly commits the United States not to impose tariffs. That's what the treaty is for. This is a decision made by the president to impose tariffs. And the reason given? Fentanyl? You gotta be kidding. No one in their right mind would believe that, except perhaps here in the United States, because they dare not ask the question. Fentanyl was coming into this country when NAFTA was passed and when the next Congress was passed. Everybody in their right mind knew, because it was in the financial press. What NAFTA was to give access to the United States to products coming from Canada and Mexico without paying a tariff, and vice versa, goods from America going to Mexico. That's what the thing was for. Mr. Trump is unilaterally breaking or threatening to break a treaty obligation and giving as his reasons something that makes absolutely no sense at all. And by the way, it will come whether these tariffs are imposed or not, is because the United States is a buyer at incredible wealth of all of these drugs. As the president of Mexico recently said, the drug problem exists on both sides of the border. All we have is the cheap shot of a president in the U.S. who finds it convenient to blame one half of the story and pretend and the other one isn't guilty. This is not going to cut it. Now, let's imagine, however, that he goes through with it. Let's imagine that the Republican Party is in sufficient control to make it happen. I have only two things to say. One, all Americans should join me in taking a step back and realizing what Mr. Trump is proposing. The Republican Party, for at least the last century, has presented itself to the American people. Vote for us because we cut taxes, we want to reduce government, blah, blah, blah. A program of massive tariffs is a tax on imports, just like we have a tax on income, a tax on wealth, a tax on sales, a tax on property. We have a tax on imports. We've had it from the beginning of the United States. It used to be called import duties. Now it's called tariffs. But this is a party that has abandoned tax cuts and now puts forward tax increases. But because it is a theatrical party and is afraid to confront the reality, it finds it terribly exciting to refer to tariffs as if they weren't taxes. And as you know, Mr. Trump is fond of talking about tariffs as if they are being imposed on China, which of course they can't be. The only imposition of tariffs on China that can be done is by the government in China, not here. Anyway, here's the second point. Mexico is an economy with a lot of problems. It's a poor country, certainly relative to the United States. The United States is now its largest purchaser of Mexican exports, a result in part of the NAFTA agreements. Okay, if you deport millions, which he's promised to do, into Mexico, as you impose tariffs, which he's now promised to do on Mexico, you're hitting Mexican economy with a 1-2-3 punch. I would like everyone to understand. Number one, millions of Mexicans or Central Americans now working in the United States send money back to Mexico. It's called remittances. It's a very important income to the Mexican economy. That will either disappear or be sharply reduced in a relatively short amount of time. That's a major economic blow. If you hit them with tariffs, it will shut off a significant portion of their exports because those will become too expensive in the United States because the cost of production in Mexico will have added to it the tariff importers have to pay Uncle Sam. That will hurt exports from Mexico, and the U.S. is its number one market. Third and final, if you do these two things, you will depress employment in Mexico. People who can't keep their jobs because their employer cannot sell exports in the United States, which means Mexico will have no remittances, millions of people arriving looking for work at a time of shooting up unemployment. You know what that is? A recipe to fundamentally destabilize an economy. We're going to have on our southern border an enormously dysfunctional catastrophe. It is a staple of American history. Unfortunately, it's also a staple of European history and Asian history and African history. It's called the infant industry argument. It's been around for 2 centuries, if not more. And it says the following: if you're a country that's behind other countries in its economic development, which the United States in the 19th century was, but you're now having the ability to at least start to have an industrial foundation, you might then say that your industries were in their infancy. Well, then the argument was you need protection from the more advanced industrial powers, which for the United States in the 19th century was above all Britain, of which it had been a colony until not that long before, and to a second degree, Germany. And by the way, infant industry argument, if you look at the most developed arguments for it, is German. The German economy list, LIST, is famously associated with the most sophisticated arguments you'll be squashed in your infancy, because the more developed, having the market to themselves, because you're not there yet, will lower the price, which you cannot achieve, and so they'll kill you. And if you want to live and you want to grow and you want to be an industrial base, you have to protect yourself until you're of a size comparable to the old guys, and then they can't do anything that you can't match. That's an argument for a tariff protection. The United States has used them on and off. Absolutely. There's nothing new, revolutionary, that Mr. Trump would sign it. But let me underscore what he's not telling you. We have, for the previous half century, been the number one country favoring free trade, because we could excel, because we were the old guys. We could squash the infants who had to protect themselves, which they did around the world, mostly by tariffs. In most cases, the United States wouldn't let them have tariffs, threatened damage to them if they did. The one country in the world that had something better than a tariff protection was the People's Republic of China. They had the Communist Party and the whole ideological, geopolitical barrier that prevented them from having to worry. They could develop their own market. Because of the size of their country, that could mushroom quickly relative to what the West had. So they were able, without tariffs, to protect themselves. But you can be sure that if the richest country of the world, which used to be the protector of free trade, can't make it anymore in a free trade world that it helped to create, will now lead the march back to tariffs, back to protectionism. And to answer your question, absolutely. The number one question in Europe today, among the giants there, Germany, Britain, France, Italy, is whether and how to follow the United States. And they're not at all unaware that when countries become protectionist, turning inward, they become unreliable allies in global politics, because they're out for number one. Now, they always were, but number one's interests were a global free trade environment. Now number one isn't. And you have the irony that Mr. Xi Jinping in China is talking about free trade and open dialogue. He's the champion of free trade because the United States cannot play that role. But that's because our economy is in trouble and declining, not because we are strong and powerful. The latter is make-believe.